Peter.
We're picking up in 1 Peter chapter 3, and he just quoted some of the essence of the Sermon on the Mount of not returning evil for evil, insult for insult, but blessing those who curse you even. And then he quotes an Old Testament passage in Psalm 34 in verses 10 through 12, in just kind of letting everyone know that we should refrain our tongues from speaking evil, trust God to bring His reward in His time on our lives. And then he goes on, verse 14, but even if you should suffer for the sake of righteousness, you are blessed, and do not fear their intimidation, and do not be troubled. But sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts, always being ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you, yet with gentleness and reverence. Just constant in this book, he's talking about how we need to guard our reaction, our demeanor, and that is going to be a reflection to others, and that, with the wives, the husbands will say, what's going on with you, and inquire of them with us towards others in the community. He's saying if we really do this in a right way, even though there's intimidation or mistreatment, if we act in a certain way, they're going to be asking, what is this hope in you? I don't know if you've ever had that happen. I know I was with a group of guys one time at a restaurant, and just brothers in the Lord, and we were just fellowshipping and having such a good time. A guy came over and asked us, who are you? What's going on? It happened with me in Morocco just last year, bringing several groups to this one little outside restaurant. And by the third time, the waiter came over and says, what is your group? Who are you? What? And so by your behavior, people can see that there's something different. And so that's what Peter's exhorting us here. He says in verse 16, and keep a good conscience, so that in the thing in which you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame. For it is better, verse 17, if God will it so, that you suffer for doing what is right rather than for doing what is wrong. There's no great reward in suffering for doing what is wrong. I mean, that's called recompense, justice, punishment. And there's no great reward in you getting some kind of treatment for doing what is wrong. But if you're mistreated for doing what is right, and you stand up in that and continue to do what's right, there's something to be said about that. And he goes on now in 1 Peter chapter 3, and there is the next few verses are really an area of great discussion and maybe even controversy. So I'm going to read basically these next 4 or 5 verses. It says, for Christ also died for sins once for all. This isn't the controversial part. The just for the unjust, in order that he might bring us to God, having been put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit. So, I mean, he's bringing something here, and he's really trying to, once again, bring in the sacrifice, what Jesus did, and he's bringing in the spiritual aspect of it here as best he can, because he's going into kind of a deep topic here. It says in verse 19, in which also he made alive in the spirit, he said, in which also he went and made proclamation to the spirits now in prison. And this is a question. A lot of people will take this verse and say, see, Jesus went and spoke to all the dead people and made proclamation to them, about his life, about what it was, the gospel, whatever. But here he goes on in verse 20 and he defines these ones he went and talked to. Now, the distinction here sometimes is most often in the scriptures when it's talking about dead people, it talks about souls, not exclusively. But here it says spirits now in prison. And this may be a key as to who he's talking to. He says, who, in verse 20, who once were disobedient when the patience of God kept waiting in the days of Noah during the construction of the ark, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through the water. And he says he made proclamation to the spirits who were disobedient in the days of Noah. This is a really tiny little reference. But in the early writings in the first century, first 3 centuries, the writing of the church fathers, many of them related this to what happened in Genesis chapter 6. And it's interesting because he says, those spirits who were disobedient when the patience of God kept waiting in the days of Noah. So it was during a certain time period he's talking about here. The construction of the ark in which 8 people were saved. So there are 8, we know about that. The ark saved Noah, his wife, his 3 boys, and their wives. Those were the only ones that came through the flood. But here he's saying he went and made proclamation to the spirits now in prison. Now, the judgment hasn't come yet. The ultimate judgment, the judgment day has not come yet. And yet there, he says here, there's spirits now in prison. So who are those? What are those? Why are they in prison already when the judgment day hasn't come? And so some people relate that to Jude verse 6, where it says those that were I better get it. It said in verse 6, and angels who did not keep their own domain but abandoned their proper abode, he has kept in eternal bonds under darkness for the judgment of the great day. So here he says that there were angels that left their proper abode, abandoned their proper position, and they are already in bonds. They're in chains under darkness, waiting for the judgment. And so the early church related that to this, and then they went back and related, they believed that those spirits that he's talking to there were the sons of God in Genesis 6 who had relations with the daughters of men and left their proper abode. They weren't supposed to be in the realm of the humans and having relationships with women, and that their offspring then came forth and was men of renown. Other, in writings in the early church, they were an evil brood, it says. And so, we see that out of them came these half angels, half human. And so this passage, a lot people would say, especially in the early church, they say that relates to this whole thing, that he went and made proclamation to those spirits that were in prison, and those spirits in prison were the spirits, those angels, those fallen angels that were disobedient in the days of Noah, that had relationships with the daughters of men, okay? Anyway, that's just thrown in there, this little thing. I know in my Bible, I was showing Chad here that's helping me, there's my 4 pages of my Bible are with commentary about these 3 or 4 verses. I mean, it's just like, what do you do with these? And what is this now saying? Anyway, he says that in just kind of an illustration of something that, it seems like people should know, I guess. But we haven't known in our generation really what this is talking about. He goes on and he says in verse 21, talking about all of that, the 8 being saved in the days of Noah and rescued in the ark. Verse 21, and corresponding to that, baptism now saves you. Well, see, now people take that and they say, well, baptism now saves you. So, it believes that just being put in water will save you. So if that were the case, we could do baseball bat evangelism. When we go knock people in the head, knock them out, drag them through the water, they're now saved, throw them up on the other side, and we got all these people saved. But that's really not what it's saying here, and it actually describes that in the next part of the verse, in verse 21. Baptism now saves you, not the removal of dirt from the flesh. Okay, not just going into the water, but an appeal to God for a good conscience through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And so, baptism was that picture that, like in those days of Noah, they were saved, and the water came and washed away the evil, and they were saved because they were in the ark, which was built by, instructions were given to Noah by God to build it. When now we're in an ark, but the ark is Christ, and we're in that, and we're saved now by baptism because of a good conscience, appeal to God for a good conscience, that our conscience is cleared and cleansed by the blood of Jesus, and because of his resurrection from the dead. Jesus was raised from the dead, meaning that his sacrifice satisfied the mandates of heaven, that the call for purity and perfection and perfect blood was all satisfied in what Jesus did. And so because of that, he was raised from the dead. And it goes on to explain this resurrection, who, in verse 22, who is at the right hand of God, having gone into heaven after angels and authorities and powers had been subjected to him. So what he did on the cross subjected everything under his authority. He is now ruler of heaven and on earth. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. He's waiting now to be fully manifested, and that's what we see in Peter's earlier stuff. Wait till you see what's going to happen at the revelation of Jesus Christ. Wait till you see the salvation that's ready to be revealed when he is unveiled, when he is revealed, when we see him in his majesty. And but now it says that through what he's done here, all angels and authorities and powers have been subjected to him. And so we see that goes back to the Gospels when we were told to go in his name. All authority is in heaven and on earth. Go in his name. And so he's now seated at the right hand of the Father, Authorities have been subject to him. And so that's the place in which we stand, waiting for this time when he's fully revealed and we see the salvation that's coming our way.